Hey, what's up, guys? It's Morgan with My Spiritual Life, and today I am so excited because the topic is going to be codependency, toxic relationships. I'm super excited to be talking about that with Crystal Escobar. Crystal, thank you for being here, and do you want to introduce yourself for people who don't know how awesome you are?
Sure. Thank you so much. Well, I'm excited to talk about codependency because it's something that I am very experienced in because I was very much codependent and, still working through my codependencies, and I have a lot to share. So I'm excited that we're going to talk about this tonight. But I am Morgan and I have been connected for quite a few years because of our common um, leaving the Mormon church thing. And that's been fun. We worked together a little bit, did some collaboration a few years ago. And that was a lot of fun. We made a video together. Love that.
Forgot
And you
to
were on
link
my
that one
podcast.
below.
Yeah. And then you and your husband were on my podcast once. And that was a lot of fun. It was fun to have those, be able to share those stories together and to kind of bounce back and forth around our experience there. But basically, a little bit about me is I am a podcaster, but I started out blogging, doing the whole Mormon mommy blog thing about 14 years, 15 years ago, and that evolved into my a podcast eventually, and then a book. But then during that time is when I started my podcast. Kind of at the beginning is when I left the church, so I had a lot of Mormon mommy followers, and then decided I wanted to be really real and authentic about the fact that we had left the church. So I started sharing my whole journey out of Mormonism on my podcast from like episode 20 to 100. But then I got it all out and then stopped, kind of closed that chapter, and then went back to more of the personal development, which is kind of what I'm really passionate about. So I'm still doing the podcast, no longer talking so much about Mormonism, but just all things spiritual growth, mental wellness, all of that stuff. So that's kind of my passion these days is mental health.
I kind of feel like we're soul sisters a little bit because we kind
Yeah.
of had like the same pathway through this all. Like, I started my YouTube channel really talking about leaving Mormonism and my struggle with that and everything, and then kind of transitioned over into personal development, and now I'm trying to kind of rebrand around understanding yourself. That's the
Love that.
message I'm trying to share. I
Yeah.
love it too because I'm
Yeah.
realizing the most benefit that has come in my life, the most growth has come from understanding myself, understanding why I do the things I do, why I don't do the things that I should do, why all of these things, and just trying to get to the root of what's really going on. And of course, that root is always like our childhood and what led us to believe and think about the world and us and about ourselves in the way that we do, and how to improve that, right?
Yeah.
So yay. So that's really fun. And I will say that for anyone watching, I love Crystal. Definitely check her stuff out. It's linked below, her podcast. One thing I really love about Crystal is when you listen to her, she just has a way of just talking right to your heart. And I think it's because she's just a very, very sincere person that she has the ability to do that. So thank you, Crystal.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So breaking codependency. So I want us to get into some specific examples, but first let's kind of just start more high level and try to define it a little bit for people. And I'm going to start with reading some definitions that I got online, but of course everyone kind of defines it differently, and so then I'd love for us to kind of get into how we define codependency, what that looks like.
Okay.
So here's one definition. Codependency is a stress induced pattern of behavior that dictates how a person treats another and how she or he allows that person to influence them. The codependent obsesses over the other person and seeks to control them. I like how it mentions both the obsessing and the control, right?
Hmm.
Though for me that really resonates because I also was in a very codependent relationship. And not just in my marriage, but also with my friendships for a long time. And anyway, so I liked that definition. Did you have any comment about that definition before I read another one?
Well, for me, it was more of seeking validation through other people, which is also probably a definition that you'll find as well. But like, but Sean and I together were both codependent in different ways, and his main form of codependency was the control part, and mine was needing his validation constantly. So it's like two types of codependency coming together is a big mess.
Yes, yes, I
Yeah,
completely understand. I
yeah.
love the way you broke that down. Yeah, like this was how it showed up for him. This was how it showed up for me. Definitely, I think with women, you see that super commonly that their codependency will show up in that seeking for validation, and
Mhm,
that it's all rooted in that low self-esteem, that low self-worth, right? I don't feel good about myself, so I'm looking for someone else to feel good about me to try to put a band-aid on that, right?
mhm,
I
mhm,
love, yeah, I love the way you describe that. Here's another definition. A psychological condition or relationship in which a person manifesting low self-esteem and a strong desire for approval, like you were just saying, has an unhealthy attachment to another often controlling or manipulative person, such as a person with an addiction to alcohol or drugs. Now, I'll say that the addiction part isn't always there, but it can be. In codependent relationships, you often, I will say that when you have a relationship with someone who is addicted to something, it's often codependent.
yeah,
But it's not always the other way around. As you can have a codependent relationship where no one's addicted to anything, at least substance wise. I would say that
yeah,
they might be addicted to things like phones or sugar, things like
yeah,
that.
or each other addicted to or
Yes.
drama was, like,
Yeah.
my addiction. I called Sean my drug. Sean he was the Sean drug, and I was also addicted to drama, so I would oftentimes create drama within the relationship just to get, like, what I was needing, the validation or the love or the attention, you know?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, right? And see, the beauty of like understanding and being able to pick apart why this happens is you realize, okay, I have these needs that I need met, but I don't know how to get them met. I don't know how to really consciously recognize them. And
Mhm.
so I'm just like creating fires that I think are going to meet this need because if he puts out this fire, I'm going to feel better or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And it makes sense. Like when you get down to it, it's like it makes sense that me as a person having a hard time, I'm coping with it in the best way I know how. And that unfortunately, most people's version of coping is just super unhealthy because they just don't know better, right? And
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. So I love that example you gave. Um, the way I like to define codependency, the way that I feel like best defines it for how it showed up for me was you need someone else to be some kind of way or to do something for you in order for you to feel okay.
Mhm.
And I like defining it that way because I remember, like, so when me and Jared were first married, very, very codependent, right? We were super young and I came out of a very broken family. And so I was very insecure. And I remember like I would want him to be around all the time. And I would get really offended if he wasn't. And like, oh, you care about your friends more than me, or, things like that. I would say these things because really I was looking to feel loved and looking to feel accepted. I was looking to mend the wounds inside that I didn't know how to fix. Um, but it was like I needed Jared to do certain things or be a certain way in order for me to feel okay. And it
Mhm.
was like I would lose all my power in those situations. I was giving my power away to him. Um, the power of like my own happiness because it'd be like, okay, here's him over here doing this thing and I'm not going to be happy unless he's doing this thing. So I'm setting myself up to fail in this situation because instead of being in charge of my own happiness, I'm putting it off onto someone else that I can't control and then
Mhm.
getting mad at them when they don't give me what I want and then him feeling like defeated because he feels like he isn't enough for me, right? And like it just causing just all sorts of drama. So
Mhm.
thoughts about that?
Well, for me, it was like having a really, like you talked about the self-worth, and that was really where it all came from for me. And I think, yeah, it's kind of like the root of it all. But for me, it was like I could not um, allow myself to believe something about myself or about anything. I couldn't just like have a different opinion than him, or have want to go a different direction, especially with leaving the church. It kind of like a lot more came to the surface, and which is a good thing, because there's so much growth that comes from leaving the church, and it just it's like this volcano of eruption of like things that you didn't realize were there. And so you go through this really challenging stage. It was like probably about 3 years that it was like this huge eruption of stuff that just lava just continued to flow, and I'm like, "When's this gonna end?" I just didn't realize there was so much under the surface that I had not been addressing. And so it first started with the differences of our beliefs in the beginning, and having a hard time allowing him to be on his own journey when it came to the beliefs.
Yeah.
And so you think in a Mormon marriage, you're supposed to have the same beliefs, and that
Right.
seems to be like that's like number one importance in your relationship. And then when you don't, you're like, even though we both left the church together, it was like, oh, but now we're like, so there was one point I did describe our relationship as a mixed faith marriage, even though we both left the church, because I was
Yeah.
like, and I
Yeah.
had a hard time during that time. He had a hard time with what I was kind of like, the direction I was going with what I was interested in around beliefs. And he wanted to go more like atheist, I wanted to go more like metaphysical, and he just was threatened by all of that, and I was just like so uninspired by his atheism and like
Yeah.
lack of
Yeah.
belief in anything. I'm like, come on, can't we just like hold on to something, like isn't there something good, that we can like believe in? And he was more like all or nothing kind of thing, like he just, and which is his personality. But for me, I'm like, how about we find some parts of the religion that we liked? Is there anything? And he's like, no,
Yeah.
nothing good about religion, nothing good about God, nothing. I'd rather just not believe in anything. And so he would be mad at me for wanting to believe in anything that had
Yeah.
anything to do with a God or higher power or anything. So it was like conflict, constantly trying to be
Yeah.
okay with our different path and differences of beliefs and opinions. And we were always trying to convince each other of why we were right,
Yes.
still
Yes.
trying to be a Mormon in a way, trying to be like, I'm right and you're wrong. But
Right. And trying
we
to get on the same page, like we have to believe the same thing.
yeah, and
Right.
being so angry at him for so that was where the control part came in for me. It was being angry with him for not being more open-minded about some of the things that I thought were good about believing in a higher power, or some way of still believing in something bigger than us. And he was just so like it was the trauma part of the church that caused him to just hate everything. But he's kind of come around in a way that feels really good for both of us, but we still have slightly different beliefs, but we've like figured out how to be okay with that and
That's
not
good.
feel like we had to like convince the other person of why I'm right, he's wrong. So
Yeah.
for me, it was really challenging for me to go my own path. I always felt like he had to agree with me, or he had to be on the same page as me, or he just had to validate everything I was doing. And even with like different things that I do around my business or with the podcast or how I spend my time, I always needed to make sure that he thought what I was doing was a good thing. And if he had like an
Yeah.
opinion about what I was doing, like there was a time where he wanted to leave Mormon Enlightenment. That was the Facebook group that we started when we left the
Yeah.
church.
Yeah.
And it was really awesome. It was fun. It was a good community for a while, but then there came a time where we're like, we just need to let go of all things Mormonism. We can't keep
Yeah.
on this path of being a post-Mormon and leading this post-Mormon tribe and community because it wasn't healthy for us. It was
Yeah.
great for
Yeah.
the time being. It was about 2 years where it was really good for us, and we needed that. We needed the community, and it was like therapy for us. But then we realized it was keeping us stuck in Mormonism,
Yes. Yeah.
so we had to let that
Yep.
go, and he wanted to, even with leaving the church, he wanted to leave it like that, and I was like, "Let's slowly leave." And he's like, "No, we're leaving, like, our kids are not going. We are not going ever again. We're getting our names removed from the church records." And I was just like, "Whoa, whoa, like, can we slow down?" And then with the Mormon Enlightenment
Yeah.
thing, he wanted to just stop altogether. I was like, "How about we just, like, slowly break away?" And so I wanted to stay involved in Mormon Enlightenment for a little while. He had wanted nothing to do with it. And so I had a hard time feeling like, is he disagreeing with me spending time supporting these people, or spending any time talking about Mormonism still? So it was just like this.
And tell me that's making you think to yourself, like, "I must be wrong because he disagrees." Is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
constantly just questioning myself, my own decisions, my own beliefs, not finding that confidence within, just
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
questioning myself, and needing him to tell me, "Oh, yeah, you're doing a great job," or, "Yeah, you're on the right path," or, "Oh, I love that what you're
Right,
doing," and
right.
he stopped doing it for me. I did a whole episode about this, and I called it, you know, we say that he had to verbalize me. He had to just let me cry it out, like the babies,
Yeah.
because he had stopped soothing me, and in the ways that he always did our whole marriage. He'd say what I needed him to say. He would comfort me in ways that
Right.
he knew how I needed to be comforted. But at one point, he just realized she is just depending on me to feel good about herself, or
Right,
to trust
right.
herself, or and it was like, out of
Instead
love.
of learning to believe in yourself,
Exactly.
relying too much on his opinion,
Yeah.
right?
So out of love, he stopped doing the things that he would typically do for me whenever we'd, get into a fight. He would say all the right things, and then we'd be like, "Okay, all right, I feel better now. Thank you for
He
saying all the right things."
he
But then
stopped,
he just
like,
stopped doing it.
emotionally rescuing you,
Yeah.
right?
And he's
Right.
just like, I am not, this is not helping her. Like, it's what I'm
Yes,
doing out of
yes.
love, thinking I'm comforting her, is keeping us on this cycle that's
Yeah.
never ending, and she just needs to have a minute to figure things out. So he stopped doing those things, and I just remember that moment of realizing that he was ferberizing me, and being, like, angry, but also, like, grateful at the same time, like, "Okay, I'm so mad at you, but I think this is exactly what I need, so thank you for not rescuing me right now."
Oh my god, Crystal, this is killing me because, like, this just, like, hits me so hard because this is exactly what happened in my marriage too. It
Yeah.
was like we got to this point where, like, Jared realized I was too reliant on, like you said, just um his support and his I'm struggling to find the right word, like I his validation, that I like you said, that I'm a good person, that I'm doing good things, and that
Mhm.
and when he took that away, it was like I completely shattered. And I didn't know what to do, but I just like you said, I was like, I knew it was what I needed. Like I was ready for it. And it was
Mhm.
painful and it was hard to let go of that really that toxic connection part of
Mhm.
our marriage, right?
Yeah.
And it was so hard to let go of that because I was so scared of failing, right? And
Mhm.
that's the beauty of when you're in these codependent relationships and you can offset all of your decision making onto someone else is that you don't have to feel the shame of the weight of your mistakes.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it really all comes down to that shame and that fear of failure. Because I think that's why we obsess so much over decision making, generally speaking, is because why else would we, except that we're just so damn afraid of failing, right?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I love hearing your journey, because it just speaks to me, because we're having the same journey.
Yeah, yeah.
We really are, and it melted my heart so much, because I've heard you talk about this before. It melted my heart so much to hear you articulate all these things, and it made me feel so um like empowered and excited to realize, like, yes, that's what we did, and like, yes, it was a good thing to do, and like, look how much growth came from it. And it was the hardest time in our marriage probably ever, even though the other hardest time was when he left Mormonism and I still wanted to stay.
Mm,
That was the other hardest time, but this was even harder than that, because I was so reliant on him that it was harder him, withdrawing his validation than it was him leaving Mormonism. Um, but on the other side of it, and we'll get more into this maybe a little bit later in the discussion, but on the other side of it, it was like I finally had an opportunity to find myself, because he
mhm.
wouldn't let me use him as a crutch anymore.
Yeah. That's so true. Like, I finally started to, um, experience what it's like to make my own decisions and be confident in them, and without needing him to agree with me or just say the right things, say what I needed him to hear. Um, I sometimes would like need him to listen to a podcast and just tell me that I did and tell me that it was good. And I couldn't just like do an episode and be like, I feel good about that one. I just like, and I would be angry at him for
Yes.
not
Yeah.
listening to it or something. And so I would like, it's just interesting when I look back and think and see the different times where I just wouldn't trust myself. And even just recently I had an experience where I would normally need to explain to him why I'm doing something that I'm doing. And I just like didn't feel the need to explain to him, and I was like, "Whoa, this is new. This is a new side of me." I'm like
Whoa!
not explaining myself to him anymore and needing him to say, "Oh, that's great." And
That's so
yeah, so I was like, I felt so
awesome!
proud of myself that I was like, I didn't even have to like explain anything about this thing that I'm going to do, and don't even have to mention it to him. It's not like anything that would be like against our,
Mhm.
you know, um, that would breach any kind of trust, but it was just like a thing that I usually felt like I had to like bring
Yeah.
everything to him
Like, get
first.
permission,
Yeah,
or
like, am
like,
I
yeah,
okay?
permission,
Is this
yeah.
okay? Like
Yes, yes. Crystal, that's so cool. I feel like that's like what keeps happening for me over and over again, is I just have these little glimpses of just more and more independence and more confidence. And Jared too, because well, and I'm not going to speak for him, but it's such an amazing thing. And okay, so I'm so excited. I want to break that apart more, but first we're going to go backwards just a little bit here
okay.
and just talk about, what does codependency look like for people who maybe have never heard of that before or never seen it before. And we already talked about, you can be obsessing over the relationship. Doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic relationship. It can be a friendship. It can be a parent. You can have a codependent relationship with a child, a parent, a sibling, anyone. You can be obsessing over that relationship, over what that person thinks of you, over, like you said, getting validation or acceptance from that person. You may feel the need to be around that person, or like you can't be happy if you're not around that person, or you might get offended if they don't spend enough time with you. You may feel this need to control them. And here's the thing, is your brain can really trick you with this, because you may think, oh, I'm not controlling, like, this is me loving this person, I'm just concerned about this person, like, that's why I'm checking up on them all the time, that's why I'm calling them 8 times a day, that's why I'm texting them, and like paging their what's it, the like Google Find My Phone thing when they don't answer or whatever. It's like, it's just because I love them. And it's like, no, 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 like, this is you coping with your anxiety. This is
Mhm.
not love, right? This is you have anxiety that you're trying to cope with through obsessing over something outside of you.
Mhm.
And like if you have that problem, lots of people do. You're not crazy, you're not broken. It just like it's just a not a good healthy coping technique, and you have the opportunity to transition to a more healthy one.
Yeah.
Thoughts about any of that before I keep going?
Okay. Well, it's funny because I actually didn't know that I was codependent for my whole life until about 2 years ago. And I would
Oh,
always talk about codependent people and, maybe in like a slightly, making fun of kind of way. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so codependent, like they can't be away from each other. Or, I never really fully understood the complete definition of codependency. And I did not think that I had any bit of that at all because I didn't find myself feeling like well, I was just so comfortable in my relationship with Sean that, he was just we were never really apart. So our experience when it comes to like friends and stuff, like that wasn't my experience because we just never really we just stopped having friends, which is another form of codependency, like
sure, sure.
like instead of
Yep.
like having a little bit of independence and having our own
Mhm.
slightly separate life while being married, we just never had that. But I thought that that was a healthy thing, which,
Like, look
there's
how
balance
strong
in
our marriage
everything. Yeah,
is.
like there's
Yeah.
balance in everything. So I think it was like good. I was like, we're just committed to each other. Like we don't need all these friends. We don't need to be apart. And so I never experienced like being away from him much because even worked from home. So I never even knew that I was codependent because we were never apart. So I never thought like, "Oh my
Yes.
gosh, I can't be away from him," because I was like always with him. So if he did go somewhere, I wasn't like, "Oh my gosh," like worrying about I can't be away from him. But
Yeah.
for me it was just like always there was control too. If he wouldn't do something that like he knew that I wanted him to do, or like I had made a request and he just wasn't doing it, I would make that mean that he didn't love me as much. And so there was my control, there was the control aspect as well, but it was like, so I was blinded by it. I didn't know that I was like
Yeah.
trying to control him. I was just like, well, why doesn't he just want to do what I ask him to do?
I love the way you explain that. I made it mean he didn't love me, and and how we can use that to manipulate the situation. And I will
Hmm.
say that I think you probably in the moment genuinely felt like, well, if he cared about me, he would do this, right? And didn't see that that was a manipulative way to handle the situation. Because when you have a lot of trauma in your background, it's like you take certain things that people do and make them mean something that they don't mean
Yeah.
because your definition of love gets so twisted. But yeah, I love what you said about that of like I made it mean he didn't love me when he wouldn't do this thing. And then of course I imagine that would really frustrate him if you would say something like that, but that's how you felt. And
Hmm.
yeah, we ran into those kinds of things as well, and just realizing like and still sometimes like I will get those thoughts in my head when someone does a certain action like, wait, does that mean that person is upset with me? Or does that mean that person doesn't like me? Or is that like, is something wrong? And I just have to dial it back and remind myself that um, I can't. I can't read other people's minds, and that they have if they have a problem with me, they're gonna have to tell me, and I'm just gonna have to blissfully act like everything's fine until then.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, yeah, it's I love that example. Okay, so back off the list. There's some more codependent things, symptoms that can show up. Poor boundaries with others. So this could show up as in people maybe ask you to do a lot of things and you feel like you can't say no. Um, or it could be that you are too over responsible for other people. That's another poor boundary, is that you are jumping in to rescue them. Maybe they don't even want to be rescued, but you're jumping in to rescue them. Um, low self-esteem, that like it says it's a symptom, but really like that's like kind of the root of it
Yeah,
all.
exactly.
I just pulled these from online. Let's see. Um Difficulty making decisions. We've talked a little bit about that. That
Mhm.
is um I think I love the examples you've brought up because okay, so the difficulty making decisions, that will show up in the codependent relationship by you offloading decision making onto them, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I love that example. Trouble identifying or communicating thoughts or feelings that can come with that territory. Um let's see, a lot of these we've already talked about. A denial of problems. Now, that could be so many different issues. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's codependent, but certainly when you're in a codependent relationship, it's very hard to see it. And but once you see it, usually like you can make a lot of progress because just seeing it can that bringing that awareness can really help change a lot of those patterns.
Yeah. One thing that just came to mind was
Yeah.
people pleasing. That
Mm.
was, and, I wasn't just codependent in my relationship with Sean. I realized that, oh my gosh, I've been codependent, in a lot of all my relationships, and
Yeah.
close relationships, like with the best friend that I had in high school, the boyfriend I had in high school, and just even just friendships over the years, because always make needing them to validate me in some way. And then um mine kind of it really showed up for me when I started starting my blog and using social media. I needed that validation from all the people that I was speaking to online, and uh always needing to put stuff out there with an underlying need to just be validated. I kind of tried to do this influencer thing on Instagram for a few years when I was Mormon and trying to be like a Mormon influencer. Now I can laugh about it because I think it's really silly what I was doing, and
Hot.
trying to portray myself as the perfect family, posting all these perfect pictures and our matching
Yeah.
outfits and our, and it's just like, I was just like, now I laugh at it, but it was,
Yeah, yeah.
I needed to prove my worthiness to everybody. I needed everybody to know I
Yeah.
was a good mom. I needed everybody to know that I, even just like some of my motivation came from, like you talked about how you had a friendship that went sour, and you had a breakup, with a friend.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I did too, from one of my best friends in high school, and we were friends for many years. And um but some of my motivation, believe it or not, came from needing to prove to her that because she never really agreed with my um, marriage with Sean. And that was kind of what broke our friendship. And so there was,
Wow.
for many years, I was like, I used social media, even though I don't even know if she even saw any of my stuff. But I found
Wow.
this little motivation down deep down when you do that digging, and you find, like, where does this stem from? I'm like, oh,
Yes.
I think part of my motivation is trying to prove to this one person, this friend, that doubted me. And I
Wow.
needed to show her that, hey,
Yes.
I'm still married, we're not divorced like you had predicted, and like I'm happy, trying to
Yes.
prove to her, even
Right.
though I don't even know if she looked at my stuff.
Right, because really at the bottom of it, you're trying to prove to yourself that you made the right decision,
Yeah.
right? In spite
Mhm.
of her disapproval. I love
Yeah.
that example. It's so relatable because like yeah, we get these little I love how Jordan Peterson says like we are so complicated as human beings. We have no idea how complicated we are. We don't understand why we do a lot of the things that we do, but the more you dig, the
You're
more
like,
you start
"Oh,
to
that's,"
realize like,
and then you
"Oh,
laugh at yourself.
that's
You're like, "Oh
yes,
my gosh,
yes."
is that real?" I'm like, "Yeah, that was real."
Yes, yeah, and that's where the compassion has to come in, right? Because it's so hard it's so hard to reveal these things about yourself and to not just like get so down on yourself. And that's where the compassion has to come in, and you have to say, you know what, it makes sense why I reacted this way based off of, this stuff from my past or whatever. Like, of course I want this friend to think she was wrong. Of course.
Yeah.
I definitely want her to think she was wrong. I definitely want to think I was right. Like, of course. Like, it makes
Yeah.
sense. And
Mhm.
and that helps. But then the nice thing is when you get to the bottom of it and you can really start to pull that apart, then the genuineness starts to come out instead of the forced. And
Mhm.
that's the beauty, I feel like, of being on this journey of trying to understand yourself, is that you start pulling away from I'm doing this out of obligation, and you start saying I'm doing this because I want to, because I care about myself, because I care about my relationships. And it's just such a game changer. I just love it so much.
Mhm.
I also want to say I love how you said I needed to prove my worthiness, because that just hits me in the soul so
Mhm.
fucking
I know. Yeah.
hard. Yes, very relatable. I feel like especially for people if they've left a high demand religion, but anyone really with any unhealthy parenting that happened in their childhood is really going to resonate with that, because that's what you're left with when you grow up in an unstable home, or a home where you didn't feel loved and seen like you maybe could have been. You feel like you have to prove your worthiness. You feel like you have to earn love. And it's
Mhm.
just so sad. It's so heartbreaking. And that's why I love being on this journey where I'm just trying to love myself where I'm at and encourage myself to do better instead of getting down on myself or shaming myself into doing better.
Yeah.
I'm not perfect at it, but I'm trying.
Yeah. We're
It's
learning.
yeah. It's a growing thing. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what causes codependency. And I will just say, I mean, it comes back to your childhood generally. Anything traumatic or something perceived as traumatic. Like sometimes we can feel like, oh, well, nothing all that traumatic happened. But if your nervous system, if your brain, if your heart perceived it as traumatic, it can have a pretty intense effect on you. Um,
Mhm.
here's a cool quote from an article I read. It said, codependency can often be traced back to childhood, to the relationships we had with our parents. It usually happens when we had parents who were either overly protective or underprotective. And I was like, oh, I like the way that they explained that.
Yeah.
They were either too protective or they were neglectful. And either one of those can land you codependent, right?
Mm. I could
Because
definitely relate to the underprotective part, feeling
yes,
like
yeah.
didn't really matter all that much. I mean, I know they loved me to the best of their ability, but it didn't feel like I was really protected all that much.
Yes, similar. I just felt very unimportant. And um I felt unwanted. And I know they didn't mean for me to feel that way, right?
Mhm.
But that's how I did feel, and that I carried that into my marriage, right? Carried that into all my friendships. And like one example would be when I was in high school, I was always getting myself into really toxic relationships, either with boys or girlfriends or whatever.
Mhm.
And it was like looking back now, I can see how I felt so unimportant that it was so enticing to me to be in a relationship with someone who was very the fixer upper friends, right? Very broken, very needy. It was so enticing to me to be in a relationship like that because they would pour on the validation that I was important to them, that I mattered to them, that they needed me, right? And because I felt so unwanted at home, these toxic relationships like were so exciting at first,
Mhm.
because it was like, oh, someone wants me, someone needs me, like I matter, like look how much I matter to this person. But all those relationships ended up crashing and burning, of course, because what ended up happening was I started to have a lot of resentment toward them because they were so needy that I couldn't fulfill all their needs. And then it would trigger all of this exhaustion and shame and frustration. And so I would just burn out the friendship. And I would say that I was revolving my entire personality around being that person's friend, and that isn't sustainable. That would burn out. I'd be like, I don't know, it just a moment would happen, I would crack, and I'd be like, I can't even be around this person anymore. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So
Which is crazy when you describe that. I'm like, it's almost like you're describing the perspective of my best friend from high school, because I was the needy, broken one that she was saving, you know?
yes,
And like, no, now I'm like beyond it enough where I can be like, oh, that was probably really hard being a friend to me. You know, I was very needy and I was broken and I needed her to
right,
validate me. And so I could see how, now looking back, I could see how I was probably very exhausting, because I know that I exhausted Sean a lot with my neediness.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's yeah, so now you just start to recognize some things about yourself. That, isn't it funny how we can go many years without even seeing it, and we feel like we're the victim. We're like, but why? Like, why would they do that to me? Why would they, you know?
How could that, like, after everything I did for them, and
Yeah.
like, yes, absolutely. Oh yeah, no.
Mhm.
We love to be the victim, right?
Yeah.
And there's like a place and time for that, right? Because you have to process the pain. You have
Yeah.
to process the pain, and that's a good place to be like, "You know what? This sucked. This was awful. This really hurt me." Because that friendship ending, even if it was because she felt like you were too needy, it still crushed you, right? And you still
Yeah.
have every right to feel crushed by that. And I think that the problem with a lot of people, I would say, in society right now, is that they just don't know how to get out of the victim mindset.
Mhm.
And that but it robs you of all your power, because if you're a victim, there's nothing you can do to improve your situation, because if you did nothing wrong, then you can't fix anything, right?
Mhm.
And if you can't fix anything, then you're just stuck and you're
Yeah.
hopeless, right?
Yeah.
And and now there is situations where sometimes you really are a victim and you didn't do anything wrong. And on the flip side of that, I will say, like, with my so you just mentioned, we had chatted before about, I had a friendship end that really devastated me just like a year ago. And in my head, I kept torturing myself saying, like, what did I do wrong? Like, I did
Yeah.
something wrong. I must have done something wrong, because otherwise the friendship wouldn't have ended. And but then I realized, like, oh, wait a second. I think that this was about her and not about me. And what but it felt better to think I did something wrong, because if I did something wrong, then I could prevent myself from getting hurt in the future.
Mm.
So that was a really cool awareness, because it was like, okay, I really want to think I did something wrong, because it feels safer. It hurts more to think I got rejected for no reason,
Mm.
right? At least no reason I can understand. Now, I have no idea. Maybe there was a reason. I tried to ask her and she wouldn't give me a reason. So it was very frustrating, because I was like, okay, I'm feeling heartbroken, and I also just feel really, really confused, like I don't have an answer. But yeah, how I've tried to work through this from a lot of different angles, because it's triggered a lot of insecurity. But it's been very beneficial for me at the same time to work through these insecurities, because you can't really work through your insecurities without something triggering them, of course.
Yeah.
And anyway, so what has helped me is to realize, like, you know what, maybe I did something wrong, but unless she's going to tell me, I have no idea.
Mhm.
And and if i and if I did do something wrong, I would like to think that I'm the kind of friend that would listen and happily, make a change. I might be offended, but I'll still change. Maybe I won't be
Mhm.
happy about it. It hurts to get called out, but I'm willing to hear it. I certainly think I'm a very empathetic person. So I think I could really hear someone's side and be like, yeah, I understand why you feel that way. That's not what I meant, whatever. But
Mhm.
anyway, it's been a powerful thing to work through. And with helping me break even more codependency, just realizing like I have to look at myself and ask myself if I think I'm a good friend and why or why not.
Mhm.
And that's hard to do, right?
Yeah.
But that's the whole journey, right? Is for me the biggest turnaround from being a very codependent friend over to a much more independent friend has been validating myself, right? Complimenting myself, um trying to tell myself, Morgan, you did a good job with this thing and here's why. And that was really, really hard at the beginning. And it's still hard sometimes, but it's getting a lot easier.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like for you, what, how did, what does this transition look like from being like really codependent? I know it's very gradual, but kind of what
Mhm.
were those baby steps? What did they look like or feel like for you?
Um, well, briefly, I wanted to say the thing that helps me the most with letting go of friendships or even just any relationship that
Yeah.
sometimes it's just the nature of life, how things come to a close, and accepting it in a way that doesn't have to mean that you did anything wrong
Yeah.
necessarily, but that I heard it once before that all a lot of relationships have a lifespan, and that if you can just allow it to be and embrace it, that that person did come into your life for the exact right amount of time for you to learn whatever lessons that you needed to learn. And I like to really think of it as like this theater performance, like we're here, some of us are playing a role for other people to learn certain lessons. And when I imagined, some of these relationships that have ended in my past, and when I imagine that, getting to have another opportunity to meet up with these people again, like maybe in the afterlife or whatever, and
Yeah.
we come together and we talk about the roles that we played for one another, and it's not personal anymore. We're like, okay, thank you, you played that role perfectly, like you taught me the things that I needed to learn. You helped me step into the newer version of myself, and it could have only happened by you leaving my life. Like if you had stayed, I wouldn't have learned A, B, and C. And so that just brings me a lot of comfort, and it feels a lot less personal, and you
Yeah.
don't actually have to go back and blame yourself for anything and be like, what did I do wrong? It really doesn't even have to be anything about that. And just knowing that, no, that relationship was supposed to be exactly 5 years, and that was it. And we had to learn, we had some great memories together, but now it's time to let it go and learn the lessons that you can only learn when you let go of that relationship. And you can even let go of relationships within a relationship. And that's how I
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah.
when you ask the question of what are the incremental steps of breaking out of this codependency, it really is like breaking up with that old version of your relationship and moving
Yes.
into a new version of your relationship. So Sean and I have gone through a few different breakups within our relationship, but we never got divorced. But we broke up with the older versions of ourselves, and that was hard. It's like you have to grieve that,
Yeah.
the way things used to be, and accept that change is good. And change, it seems scary sometimes, because like sometimes I'll be like, he doesn't, like things are different. You can be very depressed about it and be like, things are just not the way they used to be. And it's like, but do you really want it to be the way it used to be? And then
Yes.
I have to
Yes.
ask myself that. I'm like, and it's funny because I'll go back and I'll read old journal entries from a few years ago, and like all these angry things about our relationship, and now I'm like missing those things. I find myself, usually the week before my period, being more emotional and being like, oh, things have changed, it's not the way it used to be. But then I'm like, wait, this is exactly what I wanted. But for some reason, there's a part of me that's resisting change, that's
Yeah.
thinking that the past is always better, or
Yeah.
reminiscing about the way things used to be, but you forget about all that goes with it, which is very emotionally taxing. So things are like a lot more calm, more mature, we're more independent. But then there's this emotional side of me that comes out every once in a while and wants me to believe that something's gone wrong because things are
Yes.
different now. But it's like, it's actually different in such a good way. And we just have to continue to embrace the changes within our relationships and grieve the old versions of us, but also know that this is life and this is exactly what we want. We want things to change, we want to evolve,
Yes.
and we don't want it to be the way it used to be.
Crystal, you were like bringing tears to my eyes when you were talking about like how certain relationships were only supposed to be this long, right?
Mhm.
It spoke to my soul so much. I I just feel like it's such a beautiful way of looking at it, and so I'm a big fan of Stoicism, which is a philosophy,
I like
and it's
stoicism.
me too. I think it's my new church, Crystal.
Yeah, I
It I
know.
think I like it a lot,
Me
and
too.
with Stoicism, it's you have to view everything that happens as the way it was meant to happen, and that's exactly what you were saying, and that's what I've been thinking about with this relationship because I even a year later, I realize in a lot of ways I'm still very hung up on it, and I think there's a lot of reasons why I'm hung up on it. Part of it's the confusion, and part of it's how much it triggered a lot of insecurities. But I love that idea of like if, if it was meant to be longer, it would have been longer, right?
Mhm.
It would have been, and it didn't. And what I've been trying to do recently is because I have like this Google Home thing on our TV, and like pictures will pop up from my Google Drive or my Google Photos or whatever. And so I'll see pictures of her and me pop up, and I would normally cringe, because I'd be like,
Mhm.
"Ah!"
Yeah, yeah.
And now I make myself look at it until it
Oh, good.
disappears, the full 60 seconds. And
Good
I
for
I
you.
make myself look at it, and I just try to remember what a good time we were having in that moment.
Yeah.
And I try to remember that because right now I don't want the damage from that relationship to bleed into my current relationships, right?
Yeah.
And my current friendships. And so I'm trying to remind myself that I can't be sitting here waiting for someone to pull the rug out from under my feet. I have to make the best of every moment I have with every person that I love. Because
Mhm.
I don't know how long, like you said, the lifespan of these relationships is going to be. But what I do know is I have today.
Yeah.
And I can love this moment, and I can love this person in this moment, and I can remember these things fondly. It takes time, to
Yeah.
get to that point. And
Yeah.
sorry, were you going to respond to
No,
that?
no.
I wanted to say one other thing about what you said of like the something's wrong, right? Because I think that that's a common like trauma response thing that people experience, like where you feel like things can be going so well and you still feel like something's wrong. And then you
Mhm.
start like fixating on things that maybe aren't even that wrong. But I just I've been realizing this about myself is that it's almost a habit, like because of everything I went through in the past, that I'm anticipating things to go wrong. And when everything's going well, I'm like, what's about to happen?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to remind myself that sometimes everything is okay, and that it's okay to just like appreciate those moments, and that my brain is kind of trying to trick me sometimes into thinking things are not okay when they actually are, just because it's such an ingrained feeling. It's genuinely a feeling more than a thought. It's something is wrong, and I'm like looking for what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you
No,
feel that
I
way.
understand, and, but I think that just always being of the mindset that nothing ever actually does go wrong, even if our initial response is like, "Oh, crap, everything was going so well, and now it's not." But it's like every time you have those little hiccups or little bumps in the road, you realize that this is why we're here. I'm still
Yes.
not like an I don't belong to any kind of belief or necessarily. I'm just open to all of them. But I do believe that we're here to learn and grow. Like, I just feel like that's just what we thrive on as humans. We don't like to just be stagnant. Like, we have to continue evolving, and it's in our nature to continue to better ourselves and to grow. And the only way we grow is when we are faced with some challenges. So whenever something comes up, yeah, of course we have that initial usual reaction, not response, because if we were like more like zen all the time, we'd just be responding like maturely to everything. But we
Responding.
react, we have this initial reaction like, oh crap, like, oh, you get really upset about
Yeah.
things, but then you calm down and you're like, how is this happening for me? Oh yeah, I definitely need to learn some things here. Yeah, I made a mistake, but what's the good that's coming from all of this, and what am I learning? And then it just becomes a fun um experiment in
You make
life.
a game out of it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, you're like
I
the
totally
scientist and you're
feel
like,
that.
oh yeah, this is a new, like, I just tried out this little experiment and that didn't quite go like I planned, but I gained a lot of information by
Yeah.
that failing,
I
because now I can
love
try
that.
something different. But
I was just reading The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, and that's exactly what that is everything that comes your way, you can use it for your good. And
yeah,
it's all in your mindset. And I love I also just read Don't Sweat the Small Stuff and It's All Small Stuff. And I loved that book. And in it he talked about how you have to plan for like X% of the time your plans aren't going to work out. And that mindset has been incredibly helpful to me because it'll be like, okay, I'm taking the kids this thing, and then like, oh, Lucas just threw up. It's like, okay, all right, well, here's one of those times where things just weren't going to work out, you know?
yeah.
And I've been able to like start applying that to just everything. Um, oh, you know what? X amount of times friendships aren't gonna work out. X amount of times there's gonna be an asshole on the road that cuts me off. Like X amount of times, like I'm not gonna get to bed on time, you know? And it has just given me a lot more like flexibility and patience in life to just realize like, oh yeah, like I just am used to thinking I'm in control of a lot more than I actually am.
Yeah,
And now that I'm a little more willing to relent that control, things feel more peaceful, you
yeah,
know? So I love that. I love that. So, I want to talk about the benefits of breaking codependency, and we've kind of sprinkled it in here. But I mean, improved confidence, improved self esteem, more optimism, feeling more fulfilled,
yeah,
having deeper, healthier, more positive relationships. And I want to say, like, for me, it was just like I realized life what I didn't know who I was, and I was so wrapped up in who being Jared's wife and so and so's friend, and I didn't know who I was, and so I felt really lost. But when I started to try to pick those pieces back up and figure out who I was, and I started very small, I was like, what do I like to do? Like, I don't even know, you know? And I was like going back to high school. I was like, what did I do in high school for fun? Like, I was like, oh, I used to play guitar a lot. Like, and I was like trying to like figure out like what do I like? Like, I need my own life, you know, and I was ready
Mhm.
for it. And as I started to kind of learn about myself, it became really exciting. And it was hard at first and it was scary, but then it became really exciting because it was like, oh, I have all these things that I actually am learning that I like, and I can do these things and it can be my thing, and I have all this ownership and all this excitement and fulfillment. And it just felt incredible once I got past the hump to feel independent and confident in myself and to feel like I could do things on my own, that I could be proud of myself, that I could pursue things I wanted to pursue. that felt incredible.
Mhm. For sure, and I would just describe it as such a light feeling that I have lately, and it feels like I didn't realize I had so much burden on myself because I was always waiting for Sean to say just the right thing before I could believe it about myself, and he'd often
Yes.
say, gosh, like we'd have the same conversations over and over about, him always trying to fill me up and make me feel good about myself. And he was
Yeah.
just always like shocked, like, I can't believe you don't view yourself the way I see you. And you'd be like, I just wish you could see yourself through my eyes. And I was just like, and I just would cry. And I'm like, me too. Why can't I? Like, I just felt like it was out of
Yeah.
my reach. Like, I just couldn't figure out. And I would even say, like, is there some kind of like button I could push? Like, I just need to figure out how to love myself. And for some reason, I
Yeah.
just couldn't find that lever. Like, it's somewhere, but like, why can't I just see what you see? And it was really the answer, the button was to just stop needing him to say it and
Yeah.
to allow myself to believe it. And more recently, I had this experience where I realized that I was actually doing it. I was like actually allowing myself to believe something about me. I think I we were like driving the car. I said something and I hoped he would say this specific thing back about it, but he didn't say it. And I was just like, about to go down my usual downward spiral of like, oh, why doesn't he love me? Why doesn't he think this? Like, oh, like just going on and on in my
Yes.
head
Yes.
about like being upset. But then I'm getting to know my inner voice a little bit more, and I heard her say, "What are you doing, Crystal? Like, why are you waiting for him to say it? Like, you can believe it now. Like, you don't need him to
Yeah.
say those words. Like, it's just like this
Wow.
whole like constructed like thing that I needed him to just say exactly the way I
Yeah.
needed to hear it." And my inner voice was just like, you can just believe all that right now. He does not have to say that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can. And I'm going to. And I just did. And I didn't even turn it into a fight like I usually would. I would be
Oh
like,
my
I would
god.
usually create drama and be like, well, you just know you don't believe in me, or you don't pay attention to me, or find something to
Yes.
blame him for
Yes.
it. And that's how I'd always get him to say what I needed him to say, by saying, you don't pay attention to me anymore, or you don't love me, you don't believe in me, you doubt me,
Yes.
you don't
Yes.
think I'm beautiful anymore. Like all these um doubts that I have in myself,
Yeah.
I would project it onto him and say, you don't do that anymore, you don't think this about me. And he was just like always blindsided, like, what? Like,
Yeah.
when did I ever say that? And I'm just like,
Yeah.
you didn't
Yeah.
say it, I just know, because you didn't say this. And he's
Yes.
like, I don't
Yes.
know I can't read your mind, I don't know exactly what you need me to say, like, I'm sorry, I just didn't know that's what you needed me to say. And it
Yes.
would be frustrating because he didn't know what was going on in my head and what I needed in that moment. And I would be upset with him and I would make it his fault. But then it was just really cool to recognize in that moment that I didn't create a fight. I like nothing. That it was just not even, it was like a whole new experience to have these doubts of myself. And almost it was like on the tip of my tongue to say what I usually do to get him to feel me up, and I just didn't say it. We went to bed. I wrote in my journal. I did like my meditations, and I was like, the next day, I was like, I did it all on my own, and I didn't even start a
Yes.
fight.
Oh my
I was like
gosh.
so proud of myself, because usually
Look at
it would have turned
that.
into like a 2 day fight probably if I had said what I was about to say, which was like what I habitually do when I'm feeling low
Yes.
or down about myself.
I love this so much, Crystal. I'm so happy for you. And I feel like I experience it in the exact same way, where just little by little, like things start to get better and you could start to see the road diverge. And sometimes you see it diverge and you still like take the
Yeah, you
old
still go
path.
back, yeah.
And that's I think that's just normal. I think that's just part of it. But the more you see it, the more you can finally start to pull yourself over to like kind of that higher road. And
Yeah.
I love it. And I think that it's just incredible to get to that point. And I feel like it just snowballs from here, right? Because
Mhm.
when you can start to have those little moments where you did it for you, like then you have all this confidence, like, oh, I can do this for me. And then like the next time it just gets easier and easier. And it just makes me so excited because I already feel like my life is just massively better than it used to be. But then I see like, oh, there's still so much room to grow. And I'm like excited to see like how much better it gets from here too. Because
Mhm.
I know that I'm on this path that's really good for me. This path of loving and validating myself, of being patient with myself, of of aiming well and trusting myself that I can do it and I can get there and that I don't have to rush it either. That's the other thing
Yeah,
is
yeah,
trying not to rush it because that's that urgency is killer. Yeah,
for
I love
sure,
that. I love
for
that.
sure. Yeah, that's what I like that you said urgency, that you've kind of learned to relax a little bit more, because that is a big thing for me, to relax in all aspects of life. Like, I always felt like I was in such a rush to do so many different things, and I've just learned to just settle into even just personal development, no rush to
Yeah.
perfect anything. Just allow those moments to come when they do, of victory. You're like, I did it that
Yes.
one time,
Yes.
and knowing, like, it does become a snowball effect, and eventually you do get better at it with practice. But there's no rush to conquer all of these things all at once, or to reach all your goals all at once. It's just like you take every day. It's just one day at a time, and it just feels lighter and more relaxed, and just more fun. Like, I feel like I'm
Yes.
having a lot more fun with my life, and I'm not taking it all so serious.
Yes, same. Like I feel like I'm able to enjoy more things because I'm not so caught up in the shame and the urgency, right?
Yeah.
The shame and the urgency to get rid of the shame, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and I love I just you keep saying so many awesome things that I keep like just talking in circles because I just love things you're saying. That's a good problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that um what you're saying to me, what it comes across as, I trust myself. I don't have to rush to fix all these things and do all these things and accomplish all these things because I trust myself. And I just think that's what we all have to aim for, right? Because I think that when you think about that urgency and that scarcity mindset and that fear and the shame and all those things that we really struggle with, the way you combat all those things is through trusting yourself, which is the thing that we most don't want to do because we don't think we deserve it, right? We don't
Mhm.
think that we're capable of doing a good job, which is why there's so much urgency in the first place because we're trying to hammer ourselves into doing the right thing. Um, and what I've seen in my life is the more that I try to relax and trust myself instead of trying to shame and urgent rush myself is I start to see how trustworthy I actually am. And the beauty is you don't have to be perfect to be trustworthy.
Yeah.
You don't have to be perfect. It's all about I trust myself to do my best with what I've got and
Mhm.
to keep stepping forward. Like that's all it has to be.
Mhm.
And that's such a beautiful space to be in because I do feel like a lot of pressure has come off my shoulders because I don't feel like I'm in a rush to get anywhere. Like I can just do what I'm doing and that can be enough.
Mhm.
And not to say that I don't ever get triggered still, but it's getting better and better, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
So, benefits of breaking codependency. If you have any others, deeper, healthier, more positive, and uplifting relationships. Your here's the thing. When you have a codependent relationship, you might think to yourself, we're so close, our relationship is so deep. But really, it's like it feels deep, but that's because there's way too much interconnectedness instead of like it's way too much we need each other and not we choose each other. And I feel like there's a big difference, right? Because I want to be married to Jared because I want him and not because like I'm going to feel insecure without him and I have this desperation, right?
Mhm.
And that I think some people in their head they get, well, desperation is like so romantic. It's like, but it's not. not
No.
not in the long term, right?
Yeah.
It's really not.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. I feel like we've definitely made a huge shift in our relationship where it was definitely a lot of desperation on both sides that caused like, and we dealt with it in different ways. He was codependent in different ways. I dealt with it in different ways. And it was just like the combination was really challenging, but we both like obsessed over the other person's life,
Yeah.
everything that they were doing. Um and yeah, there's just when you can let go of that, you almost feel a little bit scared, like, but what does this mean for us? Like, oh, we're just drifting apart. Like that's what
Yes,
I kept
yes.
saying. Like, so we're just drifting apart. Like we just like it was just really scary, and I'd be really upset with the way we were changing, but at the same time, it was feeling so much better. So there's this. It's just fear when you're transitioning out of that obsession with being so involved in the other person's life, thinking that if you're not, then your relationship, you just start to fade. The love starts to fade, you drift apart. Those are all the things I think that movies can sometimes put fear in your mind.
Yes, yes, I
And
totally
like I always
agree.
had this fear that as you get older, men start to want younger women, and
Right,
Sean, that couldn't be
right.
the furthest thing from Sean. Like Sean, it's just like not even anything he would even think about. But it's like you just think that that's the way it goes in marriage, because you see so many movies like that. And so it's like I always thought that that was part of marriage, that you're eventually you're going to get old, your husband's going to start wanting younger women, and you have to be worried about him all the time.
Yeah,
But like
yeah.
when you can let go of all those fears that somehow are in there from movies or from things that you saw growing up, you let it all go, you relax, you learn to trust, and you allow each other to be on their own journey. Not that you
Yes,
are it's not like you're separating, like it's just like it's the opposite of what you think it's going to turn into when you start letting go. You think like we're just drifting apart. It's going to mean that we're just drifting apart if we're not obsessing over what the other person's doing all the time. And like
yes,
know every little aspect of the other person's life, and being so involved. But you let go a little bit, and it just feels so much better.
yes,
You feel free for yourself because you're no longer, you kind of do it for each other. You let go of each other. And so from my end, I feel free. Like he's not controlling so many of my life decisions. He's not throwing in his opinions all the time about everything that I'm doing, and vice versa. And it feels like such a gift that we're giving one another. And there's still just as much connection, just as much love and trust. It doesn't feel scary anymore. It's just when you initially start to do things differently in your relationship, you start to have you fear all the worst case scenarios that you probably saw in movies or from your own parents or in other relationships growing up. You think, oh, well, this is going to happen if we do this. This is going to happen. But then you just trust and you go that route, and you realize like, oh, none of that's happening, and we actually feel a lot more mentally well. Both of us are just
yes.
more mentally well, healthy, and it feels good for both of us, and we feel free, but we feel so connected at the same time.
Yes, I love the way you summarize all that because that getting over that hump when you're trying to break a codependent relationship just feels terrifying, right? But that's
Mhm.
just normal. That it's normal because there's probably fears of abandonment mixed in, and like most everyone's got some kind of abandonment fear from, one issue from childhood or another. And
Mhm.
but just getting over that hump and realizing like how beautiful it is that you can both have your own lives and then come together at the end of the day and sleep in bed next to each other and love and support each other, and yet still have that freedom to be your own person, to live your own life, to achieve your dreams, and to build that confidence in yourself. And it just I think the thing that is so beautiful about it is that I just feel more secure in my marriage than I've ever felt,
Yeah.
even though like we're not like glued together and in this mess like that we used to be. And I just feel so safe, and it's such a good feeling. It's such a good feeling to feel so safe in my marriage and to feel so supported in what I'm doing. And of course, it all just comes back to your own mindset, because Jared was always there for me and like he was always supporting me, but I didn't believe it because of my own background, my own issues, right? That I had to
Mhm.
sort through on my own, and in therapy. And yeah, what a cool transformation, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And so a couple more things off that list I had was just you don't have the weight of so many of other people's stuff dragging you down, because you don't realize like when you're so codependent with someone how much weight you're carrying around about their decisions and their thoughts and their feelings. You don't realize how heavy that is until you let
Mhm.
it go,
Yeah.
like you said earlier. And then just the biggest thing that I mentioned, toward the beginning was you don't have to rely on someone else for you to feel okay anymore. That power is within you. You have the ability to feel okay right now, and I would say that that comes through having good coping skills, good tools to work through your issues, and supporting yourself in this healthy way. um, just makes it so that you don't have to be overly reliant and waiting around for someone else to make you feel better, right?
Yeah.
You can support each other and love each other and be there for each other, but there's a big difference between that and waiting around for them to say or do the right thing, which is exactly how I felt for a long time. Was like,
Yeah.
well, I can't be happy until Jared does this, and
Yeah.
it's like, and that's a prison that no one really wants to be in, and it's a prison that you put yourself in, and it's a prison you can take yourself out of. So that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are getting close to out of time here, but what I want to do is if we have anyone that wants to jump on for the live call portion, I'm going to post the link here. And if anyone wants to jump on, you give us an aha, you can ask us a question. It'll put you in a waiting room just for a minute. Feel free to jump on. While we're waiting, if anyone wants to jump on, I want to wrap up by just talking about, how do you start to improve? If you see you're in a codependent relationship, how do you start to improve that situation or that relationship? And I would love to hear tips from you. First, I would say just realize that life is better when it's not codependent, right? And that's
Yeah.
what I think we've done a good job kind of painting, that there's beauty in having your own personality, your own goals, your own hobbies, your own opinions, your own ambitions, right? And that takes time and effort to discover, right, about yourself. And it can be this kind of really interesting thing where you're like, I want to get to know me, and it can feel weird and awkward, but it's also like really exciting. And I think it's where life starts to because like if you're familiar with Minecraft, you have like survival mode and you have like creative mode, right? And in survival mode, you're very limited in what you can do because there's things like trying to kill you all the time, right? And but in creative mode, like it's limitless. And that's how I feel like the more I heal and the more I understand myself, the more I move forward, the more I feel like I'm actually like in creative mode, and it's so fulfilling to be in creative mode and get to build all these beautiful things that I
Mhm.
didn't think were possible to build, you know?
Yeah. So the question is, what are some ways to improve
Yes.
in with that? Well, I would say like my number one go-to is a lot of writing, like journaling, writing to myself or my higher self, my inner voice, getting answers from my inner voice, no realizing that I have that power because I don't think I fully realized that. And it does stem from growing up in the high demand religion because believing my whole life that all of the answers come outside of me from the prophet or the scriptures, and never really because you feel limited in the type of answers that you can get when you're in the framework of the church. So even if your inner voice was telling you to do something, you don't fully listen because it has to be within the confines of what the church says is good or bad. So that was always this internal battle that I had, that I didn't realize what it was for many years, and realizing that I was ignoring my inner voice often, and it caused me to not trust that I even had that ability. So once I was able to let go of those beliefs and began on the road of rediscovering that inner voice, because it was so murky, because I could never really get those clear answers, because it was like the church was always like blocking that expansion of my connecting to my inner voice. So the writing aspect has been the most therapeutic way, uh, and has been the way for me to develop that trust for myself, and knowing that I do have the ability to find any answer that I'm looking for, and that I can go within with any questions or concerns that I have about life. And I don't have to go searching in a book. I don't have to look further in the scriptures. I don't have to compare notes. It's always like I would receive think I had an answer, and then always having to seek confirmation in the scriptures or from what prophets say, and never lining up. So then I just felt like I didn't have it. I just didn't have the gift of, knowing certain things that I really wanted to know and about myself. And so doing the writing exercises has been the best way for me to gain insight into where these things stem from. First of all, like you talk about, a lot of it comes from our childhood. So going back into my past and kind of sifting through all of my memories and different beliefs that I um, have developed based on my own experience growing up, and really taking a hard look at all of them. And it's definitely requires a lot of time and patience, and you start to uncover things little by little. You feel like a detective. You're
Yes.
just
Yeah.
really trying to find, okay, where did this stem from? And when you find the root of it, then it's like it dissolves. And so writing has been the way for me to figure out where my codependency stems from and how to overcome it. Once you know where it comes from, then it's a lot easier to work through it. And so, yeah, I would just say that writing and learning how to trust myself again, and the answers that I can have. I don't need validation from Sean. I don't need to make sure that he agrees with me about everything, or that he supports everything that I do, because all I need is me. But I never really allowed myself to be that for me.
Oh my god, I love it. So when our marriage really hit the fan, like, and I was trying to pick myself back up, and it's like I knew what I needed to do. I knew that I needed to step up and validate myself and comfort myself and believe in myself, right? And so I actually bought this ring for myself. I engraved it, and I it says, "I am here for you." and I started wearing it like as if like I kind of like married myself first, because it was like Jared, like our marriage could dissolve. Like it could happen. I hope it never does, right? But it could happen, or he could die. Like I could lose him, right? But I'll never lose me, right? I'll always be here. And I was like,
Mhm.
and I need to be my own rock. I need to stop looking for someone else to fix me, or for someone else to make me feel okay, or for someone else to love me. And I have to do it for me on my own. And so I just love that you said that. We are soul sisters, Crystal.
Yeah, I know.
I want to say two tips I have, and my two tips are cognitive behavioral therapy, which is something you can buy a book and do on your own, super easy. It's and having compassion for yourself. And I'll give you an example of cognitive behavioral therapy for people who don't know what it is. It's you take a thought and you basically try to challenge that thought and provide evidence for and against the thought to get yourself to break out of these very negative patterns of thinking that are often not very realistic. So some of the things I used to rely on Jared for emotionally would be like to tell me I'm a good mom or I'm a good wife, right? Because I was really insecure about it. And
Mhm.
so when things were hard between us and I didn't have that validation anymore, I like sat down and I wrote, I'm a bad mom, and here's all the evidence why. And then I wrote, I'm not a bad mom, and started writing some things down that I thought were good that I was doing as a mother. And that was extremely difficult, but it was one of the best things I had ever done. And that, in a way, was what really turned things around for us, because when I finally was able to feel secure within myself, we were able to rebuild trust again, because he could see that I didn't need him in the way that I used to, and that I was learning to be confident and believe in myself, and that he was so excited about that because he knew it meant we would both be able to live our lives in the ways that we wanted to, and
Mhm.
in very fulfilling ways. And so, you know, and having compassion for yourself, because a big thing I would do was I would rely on Jared to help me cope with my shame, right? And growing up in such a troubled home, I had a lot of shame that I just kind of inherited, right?
Mhm.
And I didn't know how to cope with that shame. And so every little mistake I made, I would hound myself for. I would torture myself. Years and years later, I'd be torturing myself for this little thing that I did wrong, or this little thing that I said that was so stupid, and that no
Mhm.
one else remembered except for me, of course.
Yeah.
And but what I started to do was trying to have compassion for myself. And now I can catch it a lot sooner. It's like I'll be hanging out with friends and I'll say something that was like super weird. And like my reaction at first is be like, oh, Morgan, why did you say that? Like, you're such a weirdo. But then I'm like, yeah, okay, have compassion for myself. Like, okay, I said that I was trying to be funny, or maybe this was on my mind or whatever. And just like, let it go, right? Just let it go. And
Mhm.
so, um trying to have compassion for myself and realizing that in a lot of those mistakes that I was making, like in my parenting or in my marriage, were because I was hurting, and
Mhm.
because I didn't know how to deal with that hurt. And the minute I started to kind of see myself through that lens of compassion, I felt like I could forgive myself, and I felt like I could move on and slowly start exhibiting healthier, more positive behaviors, rather than the negative ones.
Mhm.
So that is my advice.
I like that. I love that. Cognitive behavioral therapy is definitely something that I have found very useful. I think that is my number one when it comes to writing and getting to the root of the beliefs that I have. It all comes down to um, doing that exercise, basically.
Yes, yeah, and you can do it. So it's so easy to do, because all you need is a pen and paper and like
Yeah,
the thing that's bothering you, right? And you can say to yourself like, "Oh, so and so doesn't love me. Like, here's why. And
yeah.
here's why not." And then you start to trick your brain into realizing like, wait, maybe I'm blowing this little negative thing out of proportion and totally disregarding all the positive, which is
Yeah.
often what we do,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
yeah, that's the beauty of cognitive behavioral therapy. There's lots of books about it you can get for really cheap too. So if anyone's
Yeah.
interested, I'm sure if you Google, there's gonna be
Yeah.
like a billion books that come up. So
Yeah.
anyway, we didn't have any callers. So any final thoughts, Crystal?
No, I think that we covered a lot, and I just feel like it's a lot of fun to talk to somebody who can relate in so many different ways when it comes to our codependent nature, relationships, and I think a lot of it does stem from growing up in the Mormon church. Unfortunately,
Yep.
like, I don't
Yep.
wanna be like victim
Yep.
mentality, but it really does play a role for sure.
Yeah, and it's hard to say how much was parenting and how much was the religion and how much was the parenting that our parents learned from the other
Mormonism, yeah.
people in religion. It's really hard to say. And in
Yeah.
my opinion, I think that parenting will always trump the religion. But I could be wrong. I'm sure it depends on people's circumstances. But looking back, I think that the bad parenting I experienced did way more damage than Mormonism did. But you know, that was my experience.
Yeah.
But it's also intermixed because I grew up. My parents grew up in it, and then I grew up with them in it. So it's like, who I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know,
I know, it
but
runs deep, that's for
it's
sure.
deep.
Yeah.
It's that pioneer stock.
Yeah. I think mainly
Oh,
it's just, when I think about the prove always feeling like I needed validation and proving myself, for me, that does go back to, probably, having experiences growing up where I did make mistakes and then I didn't feel worthy, and then feeling like just so much shame that I needed to constantly seek validation that I was worthy and that I was enough, that
yeah.
I did belong at church. And so for me,
Yeah.
there was a lot of trauma when it comes to um, sins of mine that caused
Yes.
me to need constant acceptance and validation and fear that I wasn't enough or that I wasn't worthy.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think for me, I I love the way you worded that. It's just so beautiful that just that fear of I'm not enough, I'm not worthy. And I think for me, I think I internalized a lot more at home than I did at church, and I think that's because I actually had leaders and stuff that I really liked that did
Mm,
make me feel loved.
that's
Um,
cool.
and so I think that maybe that's why it's a little bit different, but I didn't feel loved at home, and my parents loved me, but there was just a lot of unhealthy dynamics that, were leading me to feel that way. But anyway, that's kind of a
Yeah.
tangent. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. We
you
could
get
go
me.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we could go on all night.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so Crystal, do you want to shout anything out for people to check out other than your podcast? We have that below. Anything else you want people to look at?
Yeah, it's just my podcast is Wanna Be Balanced, and I do one-on-one coaching now and mostly help people overcome, codependency. But one of my specialties is actually time management. That's been something I feel is the foundation, even with personal development, because, trying to structure your day in a way that um, supports the things that we're hoping to accomplish and our own personal development, taking that time for yourself to uncover these things that are what are hindering us in our lives. So I help people get to the root of things, and I feel like creating a blueprint for your day and for your week and for your year can really benefit you when it comes to your personal development. But my podcast, like I said, is want to be balanced, and I am off for the summer, but I start up again in September, and I just share a episode once a week, and I usually talk about whatever it is that I'm experiencing or working through in my own personal life. So I share a lot of my own personal stories and aha moments on the podcast.
Awesome. And there's lots of awesome episodes that people could go check out right now while you're on summer break. They could get caught up, right?
Yeah, I got
There
over, I
you
think,
go.
160 episodes now.
Whoa, congratulations.
Thanks. And I
That's
think
so
your episode
awesome.
was like 60, in the 60s. I think that's when we did yours. So they could go
I'm
down and
famous.
find yours somewhere down there.
Yeah. Back when I was still very angry, probably. I
Yeah,
don't
but
know.
I felt like I still remember the interview, and I don't remember what was said, but I just remember you were at my house and how calm you were. So
That's
I didn't
good. That's
sense a
I'll
lot
take
of
it.
anger. It was
I'll take
very
it.
calm.
Maybe you
It just
caught me
felt
on the
very calm.
latter end
Yeah,
of,
yeah. I think
my
you had worked through a bunch already, but it was very calm, but genuine
Uh,
and authentic, so it was good.
well, I'll never forget, Sean breaking that coffee pot for us, so
Yeah, that was so
thank
funny.
you.
Brecklin.
I'll have to link
I'm
that below
Brecklin.
too. Okay, so just so people know, we're talking about we made this, like, ex-Mormon skit. It was hilarious. You can go
It's
back in my
funny.
videos and find it. It was so
My
funny.
kids still ask to watch that. They thought it was so funny.
It was so good. The Mountain Dew, oh my god. It was so good. I'm gonna watch that right after this.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I love it. Crystal, I
Okay.
freaking love you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well,
You
thanks
said a
for having
lot that
me.
really touched my heart tonight, so thank you for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, I enjoyed it, so thank you for inviting me.
Yay! Well, you have a good night. Thanks,
Alright. We'll be
everybody.
in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye.